Welcome back to Bizarre Ones, where we explore the strange, the unexplained, and the deeply unsettling corners of our reality. I'm your host, and today we're diving into something that might make you question the very nature of identity itself. Imagine waking up one morning and feeling like a stranger in your own body. You look in the mirror and recognize the face, but it doesn't feel like yours. You have memories of a childhood, a family, a life, but they feel like someone else's story. Your spouse kisses you good morning, and you feel nothing. Your children hug you, and you're pretending to know who they are. You're not suffering from amnesia. You haven't lost your memories. It's worse than that. You remember everything. You know with absolute certainty that none of it happened to you, because you're not the person who lived that life. You're someone else, something else, and you've taken over. Welcome to the world of walk-ins. The concept of walk-ins exists in the fascinating gray area between spirituality, psychology, and the paranormal. And fair warning, this episode's going to get uncomfortable. Because if walk-ins are real, it means that the person you love, your partner, your parent, your best friend, could be replaced at any moment. And you might never know. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is a walk-in? In simple terms, a walk-in occurs when one soul or consciousness leaves a human body, and another soul takes its place. Now, this is not like possession, okay? See, unlike possession, which is typically portrayed as a forced, malevolent kind of thing, a walk-in is supposedly a voluntary exchange, a mutual agreement, if you will, between two souls. This typical scenario goes like this. Someone is going through extreme traumatic experience, right? Maybe they're in a car accident. Maybe they're drowning. Maybe they're in the depths of suicidal depression. Or maybe it's just they're done with everything. At that critical moment, their soul, their original consciousness decides it's done. It wants out. It's ready to leave this incarnation. But if the body's still alive, still functioning, rather than let it die, something else happens. Another soul steps in. A different consciousness takes over the controls. The body survives, but the person inside, they're gone. Replaced. The new soul inhabits the body's memories because the memories are in the brain, not the soul, at least to some degree. It can access the previous occupants' learned skills, how to speak, how to walk, social knowledge, technical abilities, but emotionally, spiritually, it's someone completely new, someone completely different. It's not them anymore. That's like the basic of it. It's an entirely different person within the same body. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like a convenient explanation for people going through trauma or mental health crisis. And sure, we'll talk about the psychological explanation. But here's what makes walk-ins so unsettling. The consistency of the experiences people report. And this is like across different cultures, different time periods, different contexts. People who claim to be walk-ins describe remarkably similar experiences. The feeling of waking up as a stranger, the emotional disconnect from their past, the sudden changes in preferences, abilities, and personality, the sense of having a mission or a purpose that wasn't there before. Are they all experiencing the same psychological phenomenon? Or is it something genuinely paranormal happening? The modern concept of walk-ins was popularized by a woman named Ruth Montgomery. In 1979, she published a book called Strangers Among Us, Enlightened Beings from a World to Come. Montgomery was a journalist turned psychic medium who claimed to receive messages from spirits through automatic writing. Now, according to Montgomery's spirit guides, walk-ins were becoming increasingly common on Earth. These weren't random soul swaps. They were part of a larger spiritual plan. Advanced souls, beings, who had already achieved high levels of spiritual evolution, were walking into human bodies to help humanity through a critical period of transition, if you will. Now, Montgomery's guides explained that it was more efficient for these evolved souls to take over adult bodies than to be born as babies and spend decades growing up. By walking into an existing body, they could immediately begin their mission, whether that was teaching, healing, raising consciousness, or preparing humanity for some coming transformation. The book was a sensation in New Age circles. Suddenly, people started recognizing themselves and Montgomery's descriptions. They'd experienced that inexplicable shift, that moment when everything changed, and now they had a framework to understand it. But here's the thing. The concept of walk-ins didn't start with Ruth Montgomery. Similar ideas exist in various spiritual and religious traditions going back centuries. In some Hindu and Buddhist teachings, there are stories of yogis and advanced practitioners who could transfer their consciousness into other bodies, either willing vessels or recently deceased bodies. This was seen as a demonstration of mastery over the material world. And shamanic traditions around the world, there are accounts of soul exchanges, spirit positions that aren't malevolent, and consciousness swapping between the living and the dead. Even in Western occult traditions, you'll find references to something similar, the concept of a soul transplant, or consciousness taking up residence in a body that isn't its original vessel. So while Ruth Montgomery popularized the term and framework, the underlying concept is ancient, which either means it's a persistent culture archetype that speaks to deep human fears and desires, or it's a real phenomenon that different cultures have recognized and described in their own terms. Let me tell you about some of the signs that people claim that indicate a walk-in has occurred. The most common trigger is a near-death experience. Someone who has had a car accident, drowned, or is resuscitated, has a heart attack, attempts suicide, some event where they come close to death, or actually clinically die or are brought back. And when they come back, they're different. Not just traumatized, different. Family members notice it first. You're not the same person, they say. And they're not talking about PTSD or depression. They're talking about fundamental changes. The person's mannerisms are different. Their voice might sound slightly different. Their laugh isn't the same. They hold their body differently. Their preferences change dramatically. Someone who loves spicy food now can't stand it. Someone who was terrified of heights suddenly wants to go skydiving. A lifelong atheist becomes deeply spiritual overnight, or vice versa. They develop new skills they've never had before. Suddenly they can play the piano or speak in a language they had never studied, or have detailed knowledge about subjects they've never encountered. When asked how do they know these things, they can't explain it. The knowledge is just there. Now, but here's the part that really disturbs people, the emotional disconnect. A walk-in might look at photos from their childhood and feel nothing. No nostalgia, no connection. Just images of some stranger's life. They'll be with their spouse, their children, their parents, and feel like they're acting in a play, playing a role. Going through the motions of loving these people because it's expected, but they're not actually feeling it, It's just not what they seem to, have any emotion for. Some walk-ins report actually having memories that don't match their documented history. They remember events that never happened, or at least not in this life. They have skills and knowledge that their original personality never acquired. They might have vivid memories of a completely different life, a different identity. And they often report having a mission, a purpose, a driving need to accomplish something specific. Their sense of purpose is so strong, so consuming, that it overwrites their connection to their previous life goals and relationships. Like it completely transforms the life that they were currently living, or the life that the original consciousness that was in this body, in that body, was living. And then people that or their friends and family are like, this is not them. This there's something else. There's something underlining that is making them different. And that is one of the signs of a walk-in. Now, let me share some specific cases that have been documented in walk-in literature. There's a case of a woman. We'll call her Sarah. In 1985, Sarah was in a severe car accident. She was declared clinically dead at the scene. Paramedics managed to revive her, and she spent 2 weeks in a coma. When she woke up, her husband noticed something was wrong immediately. She looked at him with no recognition, not amnesia. She knew his name, knew they were married, but there was no warmth in her eyes. No love. She was polite but distant, like a stranger being courteous. Over the following weeks, the changes became more pronounced. Sarah had been a vegetarian for ethical reasons almost her entire life. Now she craved meat and couldn't explain why the idea of eating animals had bothered her before. She had been an introvert who loved reading alone. Now she was compulsively social, needing to be around people constantly, where her husband described that before she was not. She was an introvert, and now all of a sudden she was an extrovert. It just wasn't who she was originally. Most disturbing to her family, she had always been tone deaf, unable to carry a tune. After the accident, she could sing beautifully and claimed to have extensive knowledge of music theory she had never studied. When confronted by the changes, Sarah finally admitted, "I'm not who you think I am. The person you knew didn't want to live anymore. She came and went, and she let me come in. I'm sorry, but she's gone." Then there's this case of a man named Robert. This was documented in the 1990s. Robert was a successful investment banker, married with 3 children, living in Connecticut. By all external measures, he had a perfect life. At age 42, he had what appeared to be a massive nervous breakdown. He became deeply depressed, withdrew from his family, couldn't work. One night, he took a bottle of sleeping pills. His wife found him in time. He survived, but the man who came back from the hospital wasn't Robert. This version of Robert, right, had no interest in banking or finance. He couldn't explain complex financial instruments he had been an expert in for years. So things that he had been an expert, went to schooling for years, he couldn't explain anymore. He was like, I don't understand that. He looked at his expensive suits and luxury car with confusion, even distaste. What he did have was an obsessive interest in environmental conservation and indigenous rights. Subjects the original Robert had never cared about or even knew about. Within a year, he had divorced his wife, quit his job, and moved to South America to work with indigenous communities, fight for deforestation. Sorry about that. When a researcher tracked him down years later and asked about the transformation, he said, "The man I replaced was killing himself slowly with a life he hated but couldn't escape. I gave him a way out, and I'm using this body to do work that actually matters. We both got what we needed." These cases raise a horrifying possibility. How would you know if someone you love had been replaced by a walk-in? They'd have the same body, the same face, access to the same memories. They could convincingly pretend to be the original person. Maybe they'd even believe they were, accessing the previous soul's memories and experiences and integrating them as their own. But something would be off. That indefinable quality that makes someone uniquely themselves would be different. The way they laugh, the light in their eyes when they look at you, the little quirks and mannerisms that make them who they are. How long would it take you to notice? Days? Weeks? Months? A year? And here's an even darker thought. What if it's already happened to someone you know, and you just haven't noticed yet? Let's talk about the different types of walk-ins that theorists have identified. There's permanent walk-ins. Permanent walk-ins are the most common type described. The original soul leaves completely and never returns. The new soul is the sole occupant of the body for the rest of the body's life. This is the classic walk-in scenario. In the scenarios we've already talked about, the scenario that we've already talked about and discussed in this episode so far, the case of the Robert and the case of the woman that we were talking about as well. Sarah, I think we said her name was. So that was an example of a permanent walk-in. Then you have temporary walk-ins. Now these are supposedly rarer. In these cases, a soul borrows a body for a specific purpose, maybe to deliver a message, complete a task, or help someone through a crisis. Once the mission is complete, the soul leaves and the original occupant returns. Some people experience missing time or periods they can't account for, believe they were temporarily walked out. Then there's blended walk-ins. These are the most complex. In these cases, the original soul doesn't leave entirely. Instead, it shares the body with the incoming soul. Both consciousness exists simultaneously, sometimes cooperating, sometimes in conflict. People who describe feeling like they have multiple selves or shifting personalities sometimes interpret this as a blended walk-in situation. There's also a disturbing subcategory, like I was saying, that some researchers mention: unwilling walk-ins. Remember how I said walk-ins are supposedly voluntary, unlike possession? Well, some accounts suggest that's not always true. There are cases of people who claim they were forced out of their bodies against their will, that a stronger consciousness essentially evicted them, took over, and left them somewhere else, possibly in another body, possibly nowhere at all. These accounts are rare and controversial, even within the walk-in believer communities, but they exist, and as you can probably guess, are terrifying. So why would souls engage in this exchange? What's the motivation? For the soul leaving, the answer is usually escape, right? Uh, you know, the life they're living has become unbearable. They're trapped in circumstances they can't change, whether it's physical pain, emotional trauma, an impossible situation, or just a profound existential despair. Death seems like the only way out. But suicide goes against their beliefs, or they're not quite ready to take that step. A walk-in exchange offers a third option. They can leave without the body dying. For the soul entering, believers say there are several possible motivations. Some are supposedly advanced spiritual beings on a mission. They're to teach, to heal, to guide humanity through a transitional period. Taking over an adult body lets them skip the vulnerable, dependent years of childhood and get straight to work. Others might be souls who died unexpectedly and aren't ready to move on. They see a body about to be vacated and jump at the chance for another round of physical existence. Then there are darker theories. Some suggest that certain walk-ins are escaped souls from other dimensions or realities, or entities that never had physical form and desperately want to experience it, or even consciousness from the future coming back to change events or even gather information. Here's where walk-in theories intersect with other paranormal phenomenon in interesting ways. Remember the Mandela effect? Some theorists suggest that when reality shifts and timelines merge, sometimes the you from a parallel timeline walks into this timeline's version of your body. You'd retain memories from your original timelines, memories that don't match this reality. You'd be a walk-in from an alternate universe, and you'd remember the Bernstein Bears while everyone around you insists it's Berenstain. Then there's the simulation theory connection. If you're living in a simulation, maybe walk-ins are when a player swaps. Your character was being piloted by one consciousness, but that player logged off and a new player took over. The character save file persists, but the person playing is different. The reincarnation angle is interesting too. Traditional reincarnation involves dying and being reborn as a baby, right? Walk-ins could be seen as an instant reincarnation without the death and rebirth stages. Same soul progression, but more efficient process, kind of mainlined, if you will. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the psychological and neurological explanations. Everything I've described, the personality changes, the emotional disconnect, the feeling of being a stranger in your own life, the new skills and knowledge, all of this can be explained through conventional psychology and neuroscience. Dissociative identity disorder, formerly called multiple personality disorder, can create the experience of different personalities or identities occupying the same body. Trauma can cause the mind to fragment, creating separate selves as a coping mechanism. Then there's depersonalization, derealization disorder. causes people to feel detached from their thoughts, feelings, and bodies. They might feel like they're observing themselves from outside or like they're living in a dream. Their life doesn't feel real or doesn't feel like theirs. Then there's traumatic brain injury from accidents that can cause a dramatic personality changes. The person's preferences, skills, and temperament shift can radically based on which parts of the brain were damaged. Then there's PTSD and severe trauma, which can fundamentally alter person's personality and worldview. The person emerges from severe trauma often feels like a different person because in many ways they are. They've been changed at a core level. Then there's fugue states, which can cause people to lose connection to their identity and past, sometimes taking on entirely new personality life. From a psychological perspective, believing you're in a walk-in could be a coping mechanism. It's easier to say, I'm a different soul, than to face the reality that trauma has fundamentally changed you. It provides a narrative framework for an otherwise incomprehensible transformation. But here's what the psychological explanations don't fully account for: the new knowledge and skills. There are documented cases of people emerging from near-death experiences or death experience with abilities they have never had before, speaking languages they've never learned or even came in contact with, playing instruments they never studied, having detailed knowledge of subjects they were never exposed to. Skeptics suggest these could be cases of cryptomnesia, forgotten memories resurfacing. They are like, well, maybe they were exposed to the language as a child and forgot about it, or they heard someone play piano and unconsciously absorbed the patterns. But the explanation doesn't always fit. There are cases to defy conventional understanding. Let me share something that really bothers me about this whole phenomenon. If walk-ins are real, then identity is far more fragile than we want to believe. You're not your body. That's just a vessel. You're not even your memories. Really, because walk-ins can access the previous occupant's memories. So what are you? What makes you you? If consciousness can be swapped out like changing drivers in a car, then what does that mean for concepts like love, commitment, responsibility? You know? If your spouse becomes a walk-in, is your marriage still valid? That's the same body you married, but it's not the same person. Are you now married to a stranger? If a parent becomes a walk-in, do they still have obligations to their child? Can you be held responsible for crimes committed by your body's previous occupant? These sound like absurd philosophical questions, but people believe their walk-ins or believe their loved ones were replaced by walk-ins have to grapple with these issues in very real, painful ways. There's a community of people online who identify as walk-ins. They share their experiences, compare notes, and try to understand what happened to them and why. Reading through their accounts is haunting. These are people who feel profoundly displaced. They're living lives that don't belong to them, surrounded by people they're supposed to love, but they don't have genuine emotional connections to these people. They're pretending to be someone that they're not, day after day, because the alternative, admitting the truth, would destroy the lives of everyone around them. Some have managed to transition into new lives that feel more authentic to their true identity, such as the guy named Robert that we talked about earlier, right? You know, he got divorced and now he lives in South America, doing environmental work. They've left their old relationships, old careers, old identities behind and built something new. They report finally feeling at peace, like they're living their real life instead of someone else's. Others, though, are stuck. They can't leave because of responsibilities or children or financial constraints. They're trapped in what feels like someone else's story, going through the motions, waiting for what? Another exchange? Death? Some kind of resolution that may never come. And then there are people on the other side, the family members who are convinced their loved ones was replaced, who watch the person they know become a stranger, who mourn someone who's still physically alive, but spiritually gone. Here's a question that keeps me up at night. What happened to the original souls? If a walk-in occurs, where did the previous occupant go? Walk-in believers usually say the soul moved on to the afterlife or reincarnated immediately into a new body, or return to some spiritual realm to rest, to plan their next income. What if that's not what happens? What if the evicted souls are stuck somewhere, displaced, homeless, watching from some other plane of existence as someone else lives their life, loves their spouse, raises their children? Or worse, what if they're still partially there, trapped in their own body but unable to control it, screaming silently while someone else pilots their flesh? I told you this episode would be uncomfortable. Let's talk about famous cases, or alleged cases of walk-ins. Some New Agers have suggested that certain public figures underwent walk-in experiences. Without making definitive claims, they point to people who had dramatic personality shifts after near-death experiences or severe illnesses. Their accounts of spiritual teachers claim to be walk-ins. They say they came into adult bodies, specifically to teach, to guide others. They have no connection to their body's previous life and relationships. Their entire purpose is the spiritual mission they're here to complete. Some people have even suggested that certain historical figures underwent radical transformations might have been walk-ins. Like these people in history that had these radical transformations, they're like, oh, that person might have been a walk-in. People who had life-changing experiences and emerged completely different. Not just philosophically, but fundamentally altered in personality, abilities, and purpose. Of course, these are all speculative. We can't prove any of these cases are genuine walk-ins rather than natural transformation, spiritual awakening, or psychological change. But the pattern is there. Throughout histories across cultures, there are stories of people who became someone else. So, like, for example, there's the one person, the mutual friend, the beneficial friend, public universal friend. That was the name of the person. Public universal friend. They had this life-changing experience, and afterwards, they used she and her pronouns, I believe, or he. I can't remember. And then after they had this traumatic experience, they started using they and them pronouns and called themselves the public universal friend, and then started an entire religious movement. And some people say this might be a case of the whole walk-in, that the public universal friend, that the person that was now in that body, that was the public universal friend, was not the same person that previously occupied the body. So real quick, let me tell you a little bit about the public universal friend, since I think that fits in with this particular situation, because I think the public universal friend could have been a walk-in. So they were born as Jemina, I think, Wilkinson. In October 1776, though, Wilkinson contracted an epidemic disease, most likely typhus, and was bedridden and near death with a high fever. The future preacher's family summoned a doctor from Attleboro, 6 miles away. The neighbors kept up a death watch at night. The fever broke after several days. The friend later reported that Wilkinson had died, right, and that they were now there. And they claimed to receive revelations from God through 2 archangels and proclaimed that there was room in many mansions for the eternal glory of thee for everyone. Accounts by the doctor and other witnesses state that illness was real, but none of them say that Wilkinson died. The friend further said that Wilkinson's soul had ascended to heaven and the body had been reanimated with a new spirit changed by God with preaching his word, that of the public universal friend, describing that name in the words of Isaiah 6:2 as the new name which the mouth of the Lord hath named. And so this person then started going by public universal friend and went by, pronouns they and them, when before they were, a person who was assigned female at birth. And then after this near-death experience, they started referring to themselves as public universal friend. Now, the fact that people said, yeah, well, Jemina never really died. Well, this could be an example of a walk-in, because with Jemina, she was, had this illness and was on the deathbed, and they could have switched out, and this entity known as the public universal friend could have taken over, if you will, and continued on from where that person, was no longer, if you get what I'm saying. So that's one particular situation, if you will. So what's the truth? Are walk-ins real? Honestly, I think that they might be. I makes sense to me. of what we've gone through. I mean, I think Public Universal Friend, what I was just talking about, is a perfect example of a historical example, if you will, of a walk-in. And I don't think anyone really knows, though, for certain. The psychological explanations are compelling. They account for most of the reported phenomenon without requiring anything supernatural. Trauma, brain injury, dissociation, mental illness. These are real documented conditions that can cause exactly the kinds of experience walk-ins describe. But then there are other cases, those outlier cases with unexplainable knowledge, dramatic ability changes, and experiences that don't fit neatly into psychological frameworks. Those make me wonder. Maybe walk-ins are exactly what believers say they are. Soul-swapping places, consciousness transplants, spiritual exchanges. Maybe they're psychological phenomenon that people interpret through a spiritual framework because it's more comforting than the alternative. Or maybe this is what really unsettles me. Maybe both explanations are true. Maybe some cases are psychological. And some cases are generally paranormal. And we have no reliable way to tell which is which. I think Public Universal Friend, that one, like I said, that particular example seems like to be a legit example. Here's what I can tell you, though, with certainty. The people who experience this phenomenon, whether it's spiritual or psychological, are generally suffering. They're living with a profound sense of displacement and alienation. Whether you believe they're literally different souls or traumatized individuals struggling with identity, their pain is real. And the people who lose loved ones to walk-ins, whether they're actual soul exchange or through trauma-induced personality transformation, their grief is real too. They're mourning someone who's still alive, which is a unique, devastating kind of loss. Before we close, I want to leave you with a thoughtful experiment. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and you don't feel like yourself. Not in a I had a bad night's sleep way. In a fundamental, this isn't my body, this isn't my life way. You look around at your house, your possessions, your family, and nothing feels familiar. Not unfamiliar like you've forgotten. Unfamiliar like you've never seen any of it before. You have memories of childhood, but it doesn't feel like your childhood. You have a job, relationships, responsibilities, but they feel like someone else's obligations that have been dumped on you. What do? Do you try to fulfill the obligations of a life that isn't yours? Do you tell the people the truth, knowing they'll think you're having a breakdown? Do you run, start over, try to build a new life that actually feels like you? And here's the disturbing part. How do you know you haven't been replaced? How do you know you haven't already been replaced? How do you know you're not a walk-in right now? And you just don't remember the exchange. Maybe you had the exchange before you could, your memories, because they say that you start getting actual memory at 5 years old. So maybe you were a walk-in before that. Maybe you were born as a blue baby or born dead, and the person that was supposed to inhabit your body left. And then when you came back 5 seconds later, or whatever the time frame, you're the walk-in. And you just don't remember the exchange. How do you know that person, the person hearing this sentence is the same person who started listening to this episode? Hell, how do you know that while listening to this podcast, that your host just switched out and somebody else is going through it and reading the script that you're listening to? Walk-ins, soul swaps, conscious transfers, spiritual possession, psychological transformation, whatever you call it. The phenomenon points to a deeply unsettling truth. Identity is fragile. The self is not as solid as we want to believe. And the line between who we are and who we could become, or who could replace us, is thinner than we'd like to think. That's all for this episode of Bizarre Ones. If you've experienced anything like that, of what we've discussed today, if you felt displaced in your own life, or watched someone you love transform into a stranger, I want to hear about it. Comment in the comment section. And maybe, just maybe, pay attention to the people around you. And make sure they're still who they are supposed to be. I've been your host, Kai. Until next time, stay bizarre. and stay yourself. I'll see you in the next podcast.